Well, good morning from Cottage Farmstead. If we haven't met before, I am Rebecca, and it is a frosty morning here at the homestead. So I'm inside, not too far away from the wood stove, staying nice and cozy in here. And probably like many of you, we are getting all of our seed catalogs in the mail right now, and there's so many beautiful varieties in there that sound so delicious and fun to grow. I mean, look at that beautiful purple tomato right there. But before I start digging into all these seed catalogs, it's really wise for me to have a plan so that I don't just buy a ton of seed that I don't have space to plant in, or maybe I don't have the time this coming year to, say, preserve some of this stuff. So today I'm going to take a look at our garden last year and see what worked, what didn't work, things that we want to repeat, things that we don't want to grow again, to get an idea of what I should be looking for when I do start looking through all of these seed catalogs. So while it was still warm outside yesterday, I went out and got a couple shots of our very fallow garden. If you've been following along with us all fall, you'll know that we have tried planting over and over and over again out here, and we have a couple spinach plants, a couple sorrel plants, a couple kale plants, a couple pansies, but otherwise mostly everything out here has died or been eaten by deer that jumped the fence or a whole bunch of rats that we've been finding in our garden. So this zone here is where we grew our peppers, and they did fantastic. It was the best pepper crop we have ever had, and we had more than enough for our needs and was able to sell. So we are going to grow probably about the same amount of peppers, just in case we don't have as great of a harvest our second year here. But we will be trying out a different jalapeno variety, as the ones that we grew this year were kind of tiny. If we wanted to say stuff them, there was really no way to do that. They were too tiny. They worked in salsa, but they weren't great for other uses. We also grew some squash in here that did get hit by the squash bug, so I may try planting that earlier. And then we grew potatoes in this row, but we are probably going to move that into a different location, which I'll talk about later. Over here, we grew all of our tomatoes, some lettuce and carrots, and our tomatillos. Our tomatillos were a total flop. Everything was nibbled on by bugs, and they started rotting on us really quickly. So this coming year, I'm hoping to get my tomatillos in the ground really early and maybe cover them with frost blankets to see if I can beat the bugs. Next zone over, we had our okra, our red drying beans, yellow green beans, regular green beans, and cucumbers. All of those crops did great. Yellow beans weren't our favorite. They weren't super prolific, and we just kind of got drips and drabs of them. And it's similar with the red beans. We didn't get a great harvest off of them. So both of those are going to be nixed from this year's plan and will free up space for something else. The cucumber variety that we grew this past year is called Homemade Pickles. I'll link it below. It is our favorite cucumber for pickling and fresh eating. It didn't take over. It didn't even require a trellis. And it produced so many pickling cucumbers that we had enough to make pickles for us, we had enough to sell, we had enough to eat fresh, and we had enough to share. So we are definitely gonna continue growing that cucumber variety. I did save some seeds from this cucumber variety as it's open pollinated, and I'll link above and below to a video where I talk about saving seeds from our garden this past year from the varieties that we really enjoyed growing. This next zone over here was our very sad attempt at hugelkultur. Our best guess is we didn't have enough compost and manure to counteract the amount of carbon that we had in the wood in here. So we really struggled to get anything to grow. The black beans grew decently, but the other two rows really struggled. We got a couple melon plants and like a calendula plant and a sunflower. And otherwise, we really didn't get much out of these rows. So we've been spending the winter digging up, as we find it, the remnants of the wood in there as much as we can, and we're gonna add a little bit more compost on top to hopefully make these beds more fruitful this coming season. One thing that we didn't have last year are these 4 new zones that you can see that we're still working on. So we have some more cardboard that we need to lay down, but we are saving up for another load of compost to allow us to finish this area to be able to grow in it. These 4 larger zones are where we're hoping to grow crops that we want to grow in bulk. So things like potatoes, popcorn, winter squash that needs to sprawl all over the place, things along those lines where we want to grow a lot of it and it just stays in the ground the entire season, and it's not something we're actively harvesting multiple times a week. So I have my handy dandy notebook that has last year's garden plan in it. So we can take a look at it to see if it actually matches what we ended up growing out there, especially with the failed hugelkultur and different things that we've tried planting. I also probably didn't record my succession plantings in here, so I'll have to take note of some of that. And then work on planning next year's garden so that I know what I need to look for in our seed stash and what I can start looking for in the seed catalogs. So as you saw when taking a look at our garden outside, you'll see that this plan is not exactly what we did last year, but it's very, very close. So it lets me know essentially where I had planted certain things. Although I do know a few things have changed now that I'm looking at this more closely. So I ended up not doing this English garden style center here, at least not this year. I may add it in the future, but I didn't cut the edges of those beds to add a little bit more space for herbs in the middle. And then this area over here, we didn't even have prepped in time to grow anything in. So this coming year, I'd like to grow more in that area, as we won't be trying to set up this entire area and this area in the same year. This will be the only new section that we're adding. So first off, when looking at what I did last year, we intentionally designed our garden to have 4 quadrants, which would allow us to rotate groups of crops around. So like our tomatoes won't be in the same spot, we'll just rotate them where the peppers were, and the peppers will be where the beans were, and the beans will be where the okra and cucumbers were, and so on. So we'll be able to do a 4-year rotation going through each of these zones. Similarly, we're going to have 4 zones over here where we're going to be growing our corn and our potatoes and our winter squash and probably drying beans some years as well. So we'll be able to rotate these around as well in order to have some decent crop rotation. We did the potatoes in this row here, and that was not enough. So we are going to do a whole zone of potatoes this year. And while we love growing drying beans, we ended up not having as much time as we thought we were this fall and winter to shell them all. So we're still shelling this past year's beans. So we're probably gonna take a break from the drying bean harvest for a year, because we have other projects that we want to work on next winter rather than sitting around shelling a ton of beans, especially since buying organic beans is still really inexpensive. So that's not something that we need to grow to, say, offset food costs. And then last year we didn't grow popcorn at all, but I think I already bought some of that seed, so I need to make sure I have enough for a full zone of that. Same thing with the potatoes. I saved some of the small potatoes for seed potatoes, but I do not think I have enough for this entire zone here. So I'll go ahead and label these. We're going to do popcorn in one zone, and we're going to do potatoes in another zone. What's not accounted for in this drawing of last year's garden is that we do have another garden up by our greenhouse, and that is where we grew our onions and garlic, and then we attempted to grow our winter squash last year, but we had such a drought that the deer ended up eating all of our winter squash. So this year we are going to move our winter squash inside of our deer fence. So one of these zones is going to be winter squash so that it can sprawl out. And in future years, like I said, we're not going to do black beans or any of the drying beans this coming year, so I may do more potatoes this time around, or maybe sweet potatoes in this zone over here, and take a break from the beans. But in the future, it'd be nice to have beans in this rotation to fix some more nitrogen into the soil for us. But with brand new compost this year, I'm not super concerned about that. And over here, I had the tomatoes in this zone last year, so I am going to rotate them down, and I'm gonna put tomatoes down here. Also put tomatillos down here, and hopefully they don't get eaten by the bugs this year. And then I'm going to put the peppers over here. And we grew a beautiful amount of peppers this year, so I'm probably gonna grow the same amount. We also had plenty of jalapenos with just 2 plants, so we'll just do 2 plants of that. And then looking at what we have here, I may end up moving my cucumbers into this since I don't have potatoes growing over there. So now I am left with our okra, green beans, our kale and chard, our greens, and then I'm gonna have to determine what I wanna do with the zone of beans that we are not growing this coming year. Since we struggled so much with the hugelpulcher pulling the nitrogen out of the soil, I think I'm going to put the green beans over here. Okra is super hardy and will grow in straight and red clay, so I'll probably put it over here where we also struggled, since it probably won't care at all. We did grow some melons last year down here, so I'm going to probably put them up here so they can sprawl into the pathway that we have around here. So grow our melons. And I will try growing our kale and chard there. And then we grew our carrots with our tomatoes last year, which did grow great. But I have so much space here, I may do an entire row devoted to the carrots. And last year I had basil intermixed around the garden. Up in my urban flower garden, I had some at the end of each row. And it was pretty inefficient when I was trying to harvest it, so I may do just a solid row of basil and maybe some other annual herbs that I don't necessarily want in my perennial herb garden. So that leaves me 2 open rows here. So these zones may end up being something new that I see in a seed catalog that I want to grow, or we might grow extra green beans or some extra tomatillos in case we're fighting the bugs again. But I'm going to leave these blank for now in case I realize I'm forgetting something as well. So I'll leave those blanks, but this is a general idea of what we are going for. And it also gives me an idea of what seeds I need to check in our seed stash to make sure that I either have them on hand or I have them ordered. I did just remember that Nathan and I talked about possibly growing celery. I don't think that would necessarily need to take up an entire 15-foot row. I also enjoy growing cut flowers, and I'm always running out of space that is protected from the deer. So I could potentially do some succession planting of zinnias and sunflowers where the deer can't get to them. And I was wanting to grow straw flower last year, and I didn't have good success with it where I planted it last year. So I may try growing it again here in a protected area from the deer. But here's a few ideas for me to stick in this area, and I can probably fit all of that in there throughout the course of the summer with succession planting. So I made note over here of the different seeds that I need to take a look for when I'm in the seed catalogs, as I don't have enough on hand for what we need, or say that variety like the tomatillo or the Amish paste, for some reason the source of seed that we had last year didn't produce well or really struggled with bugs. I may look for some different varieties. And then in the popcorn zone, I do have popcorn seed on hand, but I don't think it's enough for such a large zone. So I'll probably get one more packet just to make sure I have enough of that on hand. And now that I have this list of what I should be looking for in the seed catalogs, it allows me to focus in on what I need to get and not get carried away with all the cool varieties out there of things that I don't actually need. It's a great way to stay on budget while still growing a bountiful garden. Well, now that I'm armed with my seed list and my garden plan, I'm gonna start browsing all the beautiful seed catalogs we got in the mail the last few weeks. I hope this video was helpful to see how we plan our garden year to year. If you'd like to see how our garden grew this past year, I will link above and below to our 2023 garden season. Be sure to hit the subscribe button over there so that you can keep up with our growing season this coming year. Catch you next time.